Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 and see if this particular phone is still worth buying in 2024. Now, the thing I will definitely tell you about this particular phone is that it is a very interesting device and kind of showcases how good of hardware Samsung was making, but how weird the software was. Meaning how the software didn't last as long as how good the hardware was. And we'll talk about that throughout this video. Now, if you want to pick up some Samsung phones I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy Note 20, we basically were getting that 6.7-inch Super AMOLED Plus display on this thing. And it was a very good panel at that time. Again, this phone came out in 2020, so kind of like temper your expectations because this phone didn't have like the craziest amount of features, but for a 1080p display, Super AMOLED Plus, I mean, this was a very cool feature. Nowadays, you'd have like 90 or 120 Hz, this one was 60, but still it was a very good panel nonetheless. It was a cool design too, hole punch center display, kind of like curved sides at the top but kind of flat at the same time. It was a very unique design kind of at that time, and it was a very good looking phone. Some things, like I said, I mean, like it's not a 1440p panel, no 120 Hz, but still was a very good, respectable panel for that day and age. You were also getting that USB Type-C port at the bottom, which was nice, had Samsung DeX, very cool type of, layout for the most part. You were also getting that S Pen. Now I think, the S Pen is very good and I love having the stylus. It's a very cool feature. It's funny that now the Ultra phones have the S Pen capability, but at that time in 2020, there were already rumors coming around basically stating that, hey, Samsung may remove this, and they ended up removing it pretty much the generation after. But they did give it back to us and we've been having it on our Ultra phones for the most part. But that S Pen was a very unique feature going on for the Note phones at that time. On the back side of the Note 20, we basically had this frosted plastic back, which I think was a very weird design choice from Samsung. I feel like they easily should have given us a little bit of a better experience with this type of device. And with it having a, basically like a plastic back, it was a very, very weird thing. That in and of itself was probably one of my biggest turnoffs of not only this particular phone, but also with the Samsung Galaxy S21 that came out a little bit after this particular device as well. Now you're also getting that triple camera setup on the backside as well, and overall it's still a very good looking phone. The feeling of this phone is a little bit different because of that plastic back, but I definitely would say for a phone that looks like this, it's a very good looking phone nonetheless, and I definitely do think it's a very cool thing going on for this particular phone when it comes down to it. So on the exterior, I mean, you're still getting reverse wireless charging, standard wireless charging, IP certification. There's still a lot to love about this phone too, and it still holds up very well decently from a, like a flagship feature standpoint. I would say the price tag of this phone is probably one of the more interesting things going on for it. Because this phone, isn't brand new anymore, it's been out for 4 years now. This phone has gone down in value in the used market so many times, and you can probably buy it for like $200 something right now, probably even less than that. And that is kind of a big advantage for this type of phone. And that's probably why a lot of people are still looking at this device, because it doesn't really cost that much. It doesn't cost that much to buy because this phone has been out for so long. So if you're kind of in that, standpoint too, where you're thinking about buying this phone because of its price tag, I would recommend just continue watching this video because there probably are other phones I'd recommend rather than this particular phone as of this point. So keep that in mind, but regardless, that kind of covers it up on the outside and the price tag standpoint. Now from the camera side, this particular phone on the back side has a triple camera setup. So it has a 12 megapixel wide, 64 megapixel telephoto, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. Now in my opinion, this is still a pretty interesting camera when it comes down to it. This thing for it having, that very good camera on the backside is a very cool feature. It doesn't really, again, it doesn't cost that much money to buy this thing anymore, but it still is giving you a very respectable camera that still holds up very well in 2024. Now you're getting that 10 megapixel wide angle camera on the front, and you can do 4K at 60 videos on the front and the back of this thing, which is very good. And I think having 8K capability is just something that holds up very well on this type of device, which screams mountains to me. And having a device like this at this caliber is very good. Now, a few caveats to this, I can hype up this camera all day, but a big thing to keep in mind with this particular lens is that for one, it is kind of an outdated camera when it comes down to the other cameras in the market right now. You're basically getting much better camera systems on the current generation of Samsung phones. Think of the Galaxy S24 Ultra camera. That's a very, very good camera on that thing. Even the S22 Ultra camera was like amazing, and this one is definitely an older looking lens than that thing. On top of that, I will tell you in social media applications, so think of applications like Snapchat and TikTok and whatever those ones are, though this camera is not going to be that great from that perspective. So that in and of itself is another pretty big disadvantage when you're buying a device like this, because although it's a, still a good camera, in those devices, compared to, if you're comparing those newer devices to this one, you're not going to be getting as great of a camera. So kind of a small little other thing to kind of keep in mind there too. Not the biggest deal in the world, but just another small minor thing as well. So I will tell you this camera is still good, but those other cameras are giving you much better experiences without a doubt for sure. So that kind of covers it up there too. Now, in terms of the, software longevity on this phone, this was kind of another disadvantage for this type of device. And I think if I'm going to go through and buy a different device, you probably don't want to buy one that's already outdated with software. And that's kind of what's going on when you're buying the Samsung Galaxy Note 20. You're buying a phone that is already kind of outdated. Now, I say kind of because this thing did get, One UI 5, it did get Android 13. So that's like a decent version of Android. For those who don't know, we're currently on Android 14. So this thing is only 1 year behind, but do I want to recommend a phone to people to buy that's already kind of outdated? And I don't mind doing that if you're not going to use this phone for like 4 or 5 years. If you're buying a phone today and you plan on switching before the end of this year or maybe early next year, then this is fine for a phone you're going to use for a year because you're still getting some security updates here and there. But if you're planning on buying a phone and you plan on keeping it for like 6 years, this is not a phone you want to do that with. I would recommend going to one of the more newer phones. This one is definitely not the one, especially now that the S24s are giving you 7 years of software updates. It makes a lot more sense buying one of those devices than this one. So that kind of covers it up there too. Now from a performance standpoint, this phone is giving you that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside, which is actually pretty good. It's a pretty good, respectable chipset inside of this device. And you're getting 8 gigabytes of RAM in this phone as well. Now, the thing I loved a lot about this particular device was that you were getting still the same amount of RAM inside of this one as you were probably getting on the S23s. But also with this phone, that chipset inside of this one was actually pretty good. So for my opinion, if I'm looking at this device, for a lot of basic things I'm going to be doing, so, things like, Snapchat, TikTok, those social media applications, going on X, going on any other website and apps for the most part, this thing's going to be perfectly fine. But even like some heavier intensive applications, this thing's going to be fine at too. It's not until you start comparing this phone in like app opening speeds and game loading speeds, if you're looking at super intensive videos or editing super intensive videos on your phone and exporting those, that's when you're going to notice a lot of big differences. If you're doing a lot of small stuff, it may not be that big of a deal, but those big things, those are where the bigger issues are. And I doubt you want to go ahead and buy a phone that is already kind of a little bit sticky in that situation too. You probably don't want to do it. So in my opinion, from a performance standpoint, this phone's like okay for the most part, but you're definitely not going to be getting a crazy great performing device anymore. But it really was like when it first came out. But that is kind of the issue that you're getting on this particular device in this particular standpoint. So to kind of sum it up, what I'll definitely tell you is the Samsung Galaxy Note 20, I think is a very good phone. Like I love this phone a lot. And I think it's a very, very good device when it comes down to it. But I don't think it's a phone I would recommend anyone to purchase anymore. You are much better off, like I mentioned before, buying a device that is still supported. Buying a device that is still supported with software and is still having some sort of a future ahead of it. And you're not really getting that on this type of device. So otherwise, I think this phone is, completely worth buying. It was worth buying a couple years ago. If you plan on using this phone this year and getting rid of it next year, then by all means go for it. But if you're not, if you plan on keeping this phone for years and years and years, this is not the phone for you. And I recommend buying a phone that is still supported. Ones like the S22s, the S23s, even an S21. But this one I probably wouldn't recommend buying. So that pretty much covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.